Hey, welcome to Museum Schools and the Teaching of History at America's 250. I'm Joanna Steinberg, the Director of Learning and Engagement at the New Haven Museum here in New Haven, Connecticut, where I have the privilege of designing educational programs for school groups, universities, and community groups. And I also, in my role, see exhibitions as dynamic spaces for alternative uh, environments for teaching. And so I was part of the efforts to reinterpret the Amistad exhibition most recently, and looking forward to what's ahead for America 250. Um, it's interesting looking ahead because there are varying attitudes towards how we engage with the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Some groups are looking for inspiration from the past to celebrate liberty, courage, and the pursuit of equality. Other groups have expressed hesitancy due to the nature of commemorations. There's often the assumption that they either serve nationalistic purposes, require a celebratory outlook, ignoring unresolved social issues in the nation, perpetuating myths that history begins with the founding of the United States while also overlooking the context of colonization and slavery. However, the choice of whether to participate or not to participate as you're considering this, I think the benefits are numerous when entering into a national dialogue regarding how history is recorded, how it's presented, and how the public engages. So I see it as a chance to intentionally break with old practices within your institution to tell the stories of many groups and to present an honest retelling of history, working with academic and community advisors and engaging with the public in creative ways. As the American Historical Association describes this opportunity as a way to honor diverse voices and experiences that have shaped American history. So the point of the session is threefold, to think about how museums engage with America 250, how might educators engage with America 250, and what are the opportunities that it provides for reinterpreting U.S. history from a range of perspectives. So as I've been considering the role that museums will play in the semi-quincentennial, there are certainly opportunities for framing local history within the larger context of our national history. That could be, linking stories about abolition, suffrage, labor, LGBTQ advocacy, to connect what's happening on the grounds in your community to the larger stories in U.S. history. This could also mean promoting inquiry around the meaning of freedom, thinking about what has freedom meant in different contexts in the past, both locally, nationally, globally, but what does it mean today? Incorporating cutting edge and contemporary scholarship that broadens perspectives and reflects diverse voices. Highlighting museums' collections in the service of storytelling, so not simply to put objects and visuals on display that are somewhat fragmented in a gallery and not connecting through narrative. So the way people will remember and have a deeper engagement with U.S. history is to cluster materials, again, in the service of storytelling, and to work with designers to create immersive environments where people can really see themselves in history and engage with the artifacts in creative ways. This also presents opportunities to unearth new documents, artifacts, and lesser known stories, and creates opportunities to work collaboratively with museums, schools, organizations to participate in civic discourse about the past, the present, and the future. For educators in schools, there are opportunities when participating in the semi-quincentennial to center place-based education as a way for students to know their local and national history in the world that we've inherited. There's opportunities to teach students the basic tenets of democracy and also the long history of social justice movements so they can be informed and active citizens or participants in their communities. It also helps in the documentation of history in the last 50 years that has not been recorded. So perhaps there are opportunities for students and teachers to conduct oral histories explore their family histories, the history of cultural and civic organizations, including their schools, but also the possibilities for young people to engage in documenting the history that's happening now that people 50 years or 100 years later will reflect back on. So I have the hope of creating an archive to document the advocacy by young people and students who advocated for curriculum reform and access to quality education. This could also mean documenting environmental advocacy, LGBTQ organizing, immigrant rights, and many other examples. So there are obvious points of collaboration for museums and schools to work together in these efforts. Teachers and museum staff can collaborate to utilize exhibitions, collections, and places rooted in the nation's history in creative and meaningful ways. Museums might hold meetings or workshops with teachers and students to incorporate feedback in exhibition design and programming and community engagement. When we were updating our Amistad exhibition, it was so helpful to meet with students and teachers and hold workshops to see what was clear, what needed clarification. A student so wisely asked, did the Amistad revolt lead to other revolts? And so that prompted us to think about how we display the global context in the Amistad story. So I strongly urge museums to not just speak with scholars and with their own staff, but to engage with teachers and students who will ask the best questions that make sure your narratives are clear in those spaces. And also points of collaboration might mean building advisory teams of academic and community partners that include teachers to inform large-scale projects that they're doing. So it might be worthwhile for museums to engage in communities of practices with teachers to really hear how they're teaching the content, what they would hope for in a museum field trip, the type of spaces they would intend to take students to focus on connecting local history to the national stories. So this doesn't have to just take the form of exhibitions. We have an amazing librarian at the New Haven Museum who runs many community programs that simply creates access to archival materials and has been running community events in our research library on genealogy, maps of New Haven, learning about your city block or your house. But also architecture and alternative newspapers as well. So for the semi-quincentennial, the New Haven Museum plans to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence with a new exhibit exploring significant moments in New Haven's history through the lens of what the American Association of State and Local Histories theme is Unfinished Revolutions. The idea of unfinished revolutions will explore moments in New Haven's history when freedoms were expanded, challenged, or restricted. The exhibition will trace a series of freedom movements that have transformed ideas about human rights, liberty, and justice, connecting the past to the present in New Haven. So we're in the process of mining our archives and our collections to see what materials we have that could best convey this idea of an unfinished revolution. Some of the materials that we have are copper prints by Amos Doolittle, documenting the battles of Lexington and Concord, which as a New Haven artist, he went down to the site of the battlefield and spoke to soldiers who were part of this battle. So much of this imagery that we associate with the Battle of Lexington and Concord comes directly from firsthand accounts with soldiers, as Amos Doolittle drew on those accounts to make these illustrations that have become widely used in textbooks. We also have a journal written by a soldier in the New Haven Regiment, Josiah Atkins, really documenting the horrors of war, the challenges of being a soldier, being what he calls a stranger in a strange land in a world turned upside down during warfare. The most interesting document that we've turned up recently has been this petition written by 7 enslaved people, advocating for immediate abolition in 1783, written to the General Assembly by Cato, Frank, Jack, Cuff, Yarrow, and Abel for themselves, and on behalf of the countrymen that are slaves. What was interesting about this document, in the context of other petitions in New England written by enslaved people for about 15 years, from the 1760s through the Revolutionary War, was that this petition draws on the language of the Declaration of Independence, um, that argues for immediate abolition on the basis that enslaved people have been, quote unquote, deprived of their natural right to freedom merely upon the account of the birth of being born of Black parents who were perfidiously stolen from their native country. They write, we, their descendants, have thereby become slaves, being born of such parents, and as the Indians, their predecessors in slavery, who have served so long, and as many of them have had the assurances from their masters that if they would faithfully serve them during the war, then they would be emancipated, yet those engagements are now. So what's interesting about this petition is that they argue for abolition on many accounts. Again, drawing on the Declaration of Independence, this idea of natural rights, citing violations of Christian virtues, Christian law in terms of citing that they're descendants of Black parents who were stolen from their homelands in Africa. They talk about the fact that they have served the nation in establishing a newly formed republic, but they also cite their military service in the American Revolution as the grounds that they are owed their freedom as early as 1783. So what's interesting about this document to me is that we normally learn about the abolitionist movement as a next chapter following the American Revolution, but the fact that this petition was one of many in New England as early as 1783 reminds us that the stories of advocacy for abolition was part of the story of the American Revolution. We have found photographs that show interesting ideas about participatory democracy. This is a photograph of a suffragist outside of the Winchester Arms Factory in New Haven. So I imagine using materials like this to engage students to talk about the importance of voting rights and the ways that everyday citizens struggled for their freedom. And so here you see a suffragist standing outside of the factory, addressing a crowd of men, already subverting gender expectations, but also bypassing the obstruction of the press to report on the issues of suffrage. You can see her soapboxing, speaking directly to a crowd of men, many who may have been workers at the Winchester Arms Factory, who were part of manufacturing arms that were used during World War I, which suffragists always pointed out the contradictions of fighting for liberty abroad while denying a democracy and half of the population the right to vote at home. So I think it's a really interesting photograph to unpack a scene, to see advocacy for equality and freedom in recognizable sites within New Haven. We also have materials from Planned Parenthood that we found in our archives. One of our educators, Eve Galanis, has been doing research on this archive and has updated finding aids for researchers in the coming years as well. And so these are materials focused on Griswold versus Connecticut, 1965, a landmark Supreme Court case when that struck down Connecticut's law banning contraceptives as unconstitutional. So the bans against contraceptives and any materials deemed quote unquote obscene, which might have been about anatomy or reproductive health, had existed in Connecticut for over 80 years with the passage of Comstock laws in 1873. So according to the lawyer Catherine Rohraback, who you see in the second image here, she was a New Haven lawyer who successfully challenged the anti-birth control statutes, who famously worked on the Black Panther trial in the years that followed. According to Rohraback, by 1958, only Connecticut had an absolute ban on the contraceptive devices, one without exception, even for situations when the life of a mother might be endangered by a pregnancy. So in challenging this ban, you can see in the image on the left, Estelle Griswold, the director of Planned Parenthood, League of Connecticut, and Dr. Buxton, the chair of Yale School of Medicine, opened a birth control clinic in New Haven in 1961 and were arrested following the opening of the clinic. The ruling protected married couples' use of contraceptives without government intrusion, securing freedom for women regarding their health and family planning. So what's interesting about looking at ideas of freedom and liberty is seeing it in different contexts. In different ways, freedom might be defined in terms of political inclusion or in terms of health and personal choice. We also have a number of materials on May Day and the Black Panther trial in New Haven, which is widely remembered as a historic day by New Haven's communities when over 15,000 people from New Haven and Yale gathered on the green in support of the Black Panthers in the anti-war movement. It was really fascinating hearing the previous sessions with Dr. Haddam, where he urged us to see the Declaration of Independence as a co-authored document, not one that was static from the Revolutionary War period, but one that has been referred to by numerous social movements and activists when pointing out that the founding principles of our democracy have not been fully realized, underscoring the process of creating and maintaining a democracy is a process and one that is unfinished. It was fascinating to go through the 10-point platform by the Black Panthers, written by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale in 1966, which expressed their vision for freedom and liberation through full employment, decent housing, free healthcare, community control, and alternatives to the carceral system. While using contemporary language, the Panthers included an extensive excerpt, which you'll see in point number 10, from the Declaration of Independence to express revolutionary thought to address a long train of abuses and the usurpations by the government. So our hope for America 250 is to look at the idea of the process of forming a democracy as an unfinished process, one that traces various freedom movements and allows us to connect the past to the present. When we think about what is freedom today, what does that look like? What is the future that we hope for? So I'll leave it off there and look forward to collaborating with other museums and organizations and schools across Connecticut to think about how do we participate in this semi-quincentennial, what aspects of history do we want to document in the last 50 years, and what does the pursuit for freedom look like in the future? Thanks so much.